bookworms! Today I'm going to be doing my October wrap-up. I am really excited to be filming again because I don't know if you can see, but I've had this like little bump on my eye for like 2 weeks and it is really annoying and I haven't been able to wear makeup or contacts and I've just felt like not a human being and it's been torture. It's finally a little bit better. It kind of hurt to put mascara on today, so I'm gonna film and then like take my makeup off as quick as I possibly can. Before I get into my wrap-up, I just wanted to say two things. The first thing being my friend Chris, who runs 801 Red Designs, redesigned my blog for me and it is amazing. Like, I'm completely in love with the way that it looks. It's so pretty. It reflects me as a person so much more than my old design did. I'm just like super in love with it and super excited about it, and I've been blogging a lot because I'm just like, I just want to look at it all the time. I'm like, it's just so pretty. I'm gonna leave a link to my blog down below in case you want to check it out, and also to 801 Red Designs in case you are looking for someone to redesign your blog or if you want to start one up. But I seriously am just so in love with it and so thankful, and it's like everything that I've ever wanted in a blog and it just makes me so insanely happy. I spent so much time like working on it and going back through old posts and trying to make sure that everything's up to date to like live up to the beauty of what it looks like now, and I'm just so happy. The second thing that I want to say is that a lot of people have been commenting on my new candle shelves, which was really necessary at this point because I've acquired quite a few bookish candles. All of the ones that are on like these shelves directly behind me, those are all CanterburyRoadCo candles, which I am a rep for, and she has by far my favorite candles of any of the candles that I've purchased, and I really just love her shop so much and I wanted to like highlight them, so I was like, oh my gosh, it would be so fun if I had a shelf of just the candles. So that's where they are. I'll leave a link down below to her Etsy shop, because a lot of you have just been asking like, where are those candles from? So that is where they're from. I think that's everything. Now I'm gonna talk about the books that I read. So here we go. The first book that I read this month is Renegades by Marissa Meyer. This is an ARC version. I still haven't gotten my finished copy because I ordered a signed copy. This book follows a girl named Nova. She had always believed in the Renegades until something happened with her family and the Renegades were unable to help her. And ever since then, she has joined the anarchists and she is in favor of overthrowing the Renegades and getting rid of like the corruption that they've brought to the government. So Nova ends up going undercover and joining the Renegades as an anarchist so that she can kind of infiltrate and see what's going on and find their weaknesses and figure out how the anarchists can overthrow the Renegades. But she makes a friend named Adrian and the two of them start getting kind of close, and then there are a lot of gray lines and things aren't necessarily as black and white as Nova had thought that they were before she joined the Renegades team. So it's a really interesting story. It's all about superheroes and the abuse of power. It was a really entertaining story. It was very quick paced. It's very long. It's almost 600 pages, which I hadn't been expecting, and it definitely reads quicker than that. It's Marissa Meyer's first book that is not a fairy tale retelling, so it was definitely interesting to see her transition from what we're used to seeing her do to something brand new. And I thought that she did a really wonderful job. I really enjoyed the book. I thought that Nova was a really interesting character. There were definitely characters that frustrated me in the novel, and then there were other ones that I definitely fell in love with, like Adrian. He was super awesome. I am so curious to see how the story is going to continue. It definitely left off at a point where you're like, what? Now I need to know what's gonna happen next. I kind of saw some of the things that happened coming, but I still overall really enjoyed it. It was a really fun read, and I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I read Lair of Dreams by Libba Bray. This is the second book in the Diviners series, or the Diviners Quartet rather. There's gonna be 4 of them. The third one just came out, but this is the second one, so I thought this was a good time to pick it up. And also October is perfect for spooky reads, and this is definitely one of the creepier books. So I thoroughly like loved this one, even more than I enjoyed the first one, which I was in no way expecting because I really loved the first book. The second one added so many new characters, and while Evie is still my favorite character, I don't want to get too much into the plot because I don't want to spoil anything that happens in the first book. Evie is really no longer like the main character. She still is a main character, but now there's like a lot of main characters. There's just so much diversity in this book, and the way that Libba Bray like portrays New York in the 1920s is so fascinating to me, and I love that she's really like covering covering different aspects of history that aren't spoken about so much, because usually when you think of the 20s, you like only think of like flappers and prohibition and like all that kind of stuff, and that's kind of like where Evie fits into the storyline. But one of my favorite characters now is Ling, and she is a Chinese American and she lives in Chinatown, and it shows like all about Chinatown in the 1920s, which I never thought about really. So it was really, really interesting. And then there's also another character who lives in Harlem, and the last book explored a lot of like the Harlem Renaissance. All the characters are just so talented. A lot of them are heavily like into the arts field. So it really is like, for me, it's really the characters that make this book so good, make the series so good rather. So I again love the first book. I really loved the second book so much more than I was expecting to, and I cannot wait to read the third one. I just wish that they would stop changing the covers, because the third cover is horrible, the second cover is not great, the first cover was amazing. So maybe with the fourth book we'll get like a really nice cohesive final series covers, whatever. So it's a historical fiction novel, and it has aspects of paranormal events that are happening. So if you're somebody that gets like creeped out by ghosts and the prospect of certain things that can happen with them, I would steer clear of the series. But if you're interested in that kind of stuff, I definitely would recommend checking this one out, because it is so well written and the characters are so well developed and the story and the plot is so fascinating, and everything really kind of came to a head at the end of this book and has gotten me so excited to find out how it's going to conclude. So obviously, if you can't tell from what I've been saying, I gave Lair of Dreams 5 out of 5 stars. Next up, I reread Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, and I listened to it on audio for the first time ever. I have never listened to any audiobooks, and this was my first try. Anytime that I've talked about my hesitancy toward audiobooks, people have suggested that it's best to listen to a book that you've already read just to kind of become familiar with the format, and I would have to 100% agree with that. I listened to Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone on audio, and I completely fell in love with it. Jim Dale did such an amazing job of narrating the series. I was amazed that I was able to get something completely different out of the book than I have other times that I've read it. I feel like it's so different to hear something acted out than it is to read it. And obviously there are the movies, but to hear the actual text of the book acted out and to have like the voices and the different expressions, like I was like choking up in the first chapter when he was voicing McGonagall being sad about what happened to Lily and James Potter, and I was just like, oh, that never happened when I read it. But like to hear the distress in McGonagall's voice, I was like, whoa, like I wasn't expecting to feel like this emotional just from hearing somebody tell me the story instead of me reading it. So I really loved it. I'm not going to go into what Harry Potter's about because I think everybody knows that. The audio reread was just amazing, and I have since been on hold at my library for Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, and I can't wait until I get that one because I just really enjoyed the audio reread. I'm going to be rereading so many more books over audio now that I feel comfortable with the format, and I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars for the story and 5 out of 5 stars for the audio. Next, I read Moxie by Jennifer Matthew. This book follows a girl named Vivian who goes to school in a small town, and she becomes fed up with the way that certain things are just accepted in society at her school, and just the culture of men having so much more privilege than the women, and the things that women are just expected to deal with, and nobody says anything about them being wrong. So Viv gets inspired by her mom. Her mom was part of like the Riot Girls movement. So Viv decides to make a zine, which she distributes anonymously at her school, and she kind of starts a feminist revolution. And it was just such an empowering book to see all of these women banding together and really trying to like overthrow the patriarchy and get rid of certain social constructs that really shouldn't be tolerated. I have to say that I didn't love the writing. I did love the message that the book was trying to convey, so I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. If it hadn't been for the message, I would have given it 3 out of 5 stars, but because I think it's important for young girls to read this and to like have this fundamental knowledge earlier on in life than I did, that is why I pushed it up a full star because, again, I think that it's really important. I think that it sends a great message. I think that anyone who is a young woman should really read this so that they can understand like the different things that aren't right and things that they shouldn't have to deal with. I think it would be a really good book to be required reading in high schools. And yeah, it was really enjoyable for that reason. And like I said, gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Then I read Nevernight by Jay Kristoff, and I was so excited to get back to this one because I've mentioned it a couple of times, but I had tried to read this when it came out and it just wasn't the time for me and I was distracted, and this time I was fully invested in it and I really loved it. It follows a girl named Mia who goes to this like school for assassins, and it was so fascinating. Like I love any kind of book that has boarding school. I like really enjoyed everything about this. Mia is a total badass. This is not a young adult book. This is definitely an adult book. It's fantasy and it is very brutal. If you are averse to like any kind of descriptive killing, steer clear, because there are some scenes in here that I was like, ooh. And there are also some very graphic sex scenes as well. But Mia is a really fascinating character, and I love how she sticks to her plan, and despite being an assassin, she's a good person, and she has this reason for wanting vengeance, but she's not as cutthroat as the other people in her school, and she's very intelligent, and it was just a pleasure to like be in her head. And she also has this companion that's like her shadow, and it's a cat that eats her fears, so she's like a fearless person, and she's just truly awesome. Like everything about this book was so good, and I can't wait to read God's Grave now. So I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. Then I read The Darkest Part of the Forest by Holly Black, and this was the second Holly Black book that I've ever read. As you know, The Cruel Prince was my favorite book that I read this year, and I was like, I need to read more of Holly's writing because I just loved that one so much. So this is a standalone fantasy novel. It follows a girl named Hazel and her brother Ben, and they live in this town that is very close to the fairy world. Throughout their lives, there has been a fae prince that has been in this glass coffin that's just like asleep in the middle of the woods. And there are people, like tourists come from all over to like view him. Hazel and her brother Ben have always had these like grand ideas of what it would be like if he woke up, and they've always felt very connected to him. You know how fairies are. So fairies are a bit tricky. There are other fairies that live in the fae world, which is very close by, and there have been a couple of disappearances of humans that live like in the town, and things really start getting interesting, and the fae prince, it has disappeared from his glass coffin. So then it's just following the mystery of trying to figure out what exactly happened. And it was really enjoyable. I really love Holly Black's writing. I think that she really has a way with writing fairies. I love fairies so much, and she just like nails it with them, honestly. After reading this, I really want to reread The Cruel Prince because there are actually a couple of character cameos in The Cruel Prince of characters from The Darkest Part of the Forest. Now, like having a better sense of their character, I'm really interested in rereading some of those scenes. So I really enjoyed this one. So really exciting. This was actually the 100th book that I finished reading this year. So once I finished The Darkest Part of the Forest, I made my Goodreads goal. So everything that I read here on out is just like above my goal, which I'm pretty excited about. I really enjoyed this one, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I read The Bakersville Dozen by Christina McBride. This is a young adult thriller novel. So it follows this girl named Bailey who lives in this town where there has been a viral video that was made of 13 of the girls that really like over-sexualizes them, and there were 13 of them, hence them being called the Bakersville Dozen because they live in Bakersville. Ever since that video premiered, there has been one girl that is a member of the Bakersville Dozen that has gone missing each month. So now Bailey starts getting these mysterious red envelopes that have like kind of clues in them, and she's trying to see if she can possibly save the missing girls or if it might be too late. She's not sure, but she has to follow them and she's not allowed to get the police involved and everything. I thought that this was an interesting one. I really enjoyed the beginning of the book. I felt like the ending was a little bit of a letdown, to be honest, but I thought like leading up to it, I enjoyed it, and I felt like Bailey was more intelligent than the main character in a thriller novel usually is. Like, she did contemplate involving the police, and she has a best friend that she's working with, and her best friend is really good about like examining every single person and like trying to help Bailey and telling her like, you know, you have to even consider me. She really was thinking critically about what could possibly be the mystery behind everything going on. But then again, the ending just like didn't do it for me. So I thought it was like pretty okay, and I ended up giving it 3 out of 5 stars. Then I read The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden, and this is a Russian fantasy novel. It follows a girl named Vasilisa, and she is forest born. She's able to see all of these like spirits that are dwelling in her town, and everybody is kind of turning their back on them and worshiping a new god, and the spirit forests that have taken care of them up until this point are getting upset, and they're getting malnourished, and things start happening and people start, you know, getting hurt, and everyone thinks that Vasilisa is a witch and that she's very strange and odd, and they don't really trust her. She comes into conflict with this other character, but she ultimately is the one that kind of has to save this town. This is a really, really slow burn fantasy, but the story was so beautiful, and the way that it's written is just like gorgeous. Like, I just ate up this writing. And it's also so nice because it takes place in the winter, so it was a really good transitional read to like jump into the winter season. I think it's really beautiful. I would love to read this again, like underneath a really warm blanket. This is actually going to be a trilogy, so the second book is coming out in the beginning of December, and I'm so excited to get my hands on that one. I just truly really loved this one, and I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. I loved it so much that I actually bought a hardcover version of it, which you'll see in my book haul. Then I read this beautiful new edition of I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith. I have been wanting to read this book for so long, but they're like, okay, so when I invest in classic books, I always want to get one that is like really beautiful and will be a nice addition to my collection. So I had been like grappling with getting this paperback version, which I thought was like okay, but nothing special. And then Wednesday Books came out with this beauty, and I was just like, this is the one. As soon as it came in the mail, I started reading it, and I just adored it. I loved it so much. It follows a girl named Cassandra, and she's living in this castle in like the countryside in England, and it's her sister, her dad, her stepmother, and her younger brother, and a boy named Steven. He's not their family, but he lives with them, and he's technically like a class below them. It's all like Cassandra writing in a journal, so that's how the story is told. She's just telling you like all of the events that transpire at this castle. Things start getting interesting when they have these new neighbors that move next door, but next door is kind of like still far enough away that you need to take a car there. Cassandra's sister Rose ends up falling in love with one of the boys, and they don't necessarily like her. It's really just about Cassandra capturing all of the events that transpire at this castle, and they're also like, they're not very well off despite living in this place. Cassandra's dad is a writer, and he hasn't written a book since his like one hit book. They just have a really, like, they have so many humorous interactions with one another. The way that Cassandra tells the story is really, really interesting, and I really enjoyed her voice, which I think is why I love this book so much. So if you can see up here, like the blurb says, this book has one of the most charismatic narrators I've ever met, J.K. Rowling. So that tells you how good it is. Also, I particularly enjoyed this version because there's a new foreword that was written by Jenny Han, and I didn't know this, but Jenny Han apparently loves this book so much she read it while she was in college, and she's been collecting first editions of I Capture the Castle ever since, and she's one of my favorite writers as well, so I found that to be really interesting. Again, I just really enjoyed this. I felt like it was a very accessible classic book, and I definitely would recommend reading it if you haven't yet. I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. And then lastly, on a whim, I decided to pick up Big Little Lies by Leanne Moriarty, and I've been wanting to read this book for a while, but I just kept putting it off because I haven't really been in the mood for contemporary, but I knew that there was like a thriller aspect to it, and it was available at my library, so I was like, you know what? Today's the day. I'm gonna read this one. So I did, and I really enjoyed it, like way more than I was expecting to. Follows three main characters, Madeline, Celeste, and Jane, and each of them are dealing with issues within their family. The reason that these characters are kind of all brought together is because they each have a child that is the same age that's going into the same kindergarten class at this small school in this like beautiful beachside town. The way that it starts is that it tells you like a little bit of what happens. So there's like an event that happens at the school and somebody gets murdered. Then it flashes back and the whole rest of the book is like leading up to that one night, the trivia night at school where someone gets murdered, and you're finding out like so much about the characters and so much about like what's going on in their lives, and the whole time you're wondering like who could it be that gets murdered, and like I hope it's this person and I really hope it's not this person. And there's also little tidbits like at the end of a lot of the chapters where the police are interrogating all of the parents that had attended that event. So it also kind of gives you insight as to, okay, it has to be like one of these couple of people. So originally, like, the beginning was a little bit tough to get into because I wasn't so interested in like the kid aspect of the book, but I did get really interested in what was going on in each of like the mom's personal lives. So I loved that. It kind of reminded me of like an adult version of Pretty Little Liars, and I just thought that it was so much fun. I read it so quickly and I loved it so much. I knew that Heather from Bookables had read it, so I was like live sending her messages as I was reading because I really like talking to people who have already read things as I'm reading them. And I had this theory very early on, and so I sent her a message and I'm like, I just need to tell you my theory. You don't have to tell me if I'm right, but this is what I think is happening. This is what I think is gonna happen. And I just need to like get it out there. And then I ended up being right, but I still really enjoyed the journey, like getting there. I thought this was really well written. It was really like kept you interested and kept you turning the pages. It was just like a fun, mindless, quick read. And I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. And I even asked Heather, like, what are your other favorite books by this author? Because I definitely want to read more of her writing. I really enjoyed this one. Now I'm going to watch the HBO series, which I'm pretty excited about. So those are all the books that I have to talk about in my really long October wrap up. I have been grappling with the idea of doing a wrap up every like 5 books that I read, so that way I can talk about the books a little bit more in depth and you won't get like a 20-minute video at the end of the month with my wrap up. So let me know what you think about that idea. I know like a couple of other people have kind of been shifting over toward that as well, and the idea has just really been like appealing to me a lot more lately. Let me know what you think about that. Let me know if you read any of the books that I mentioned, or if you are interested in reading any of the books that I mentioned. That's all that I have for this video, so I will see you guys soon in a new one. Bye!